It is 66 years since the Munich air disaster robbed English football of one of its greatest young teams. 8 Manchester United players from Sir Matt Busby's brilliant side were killed when the plane carrying them crashed on February 6, 1958, and 2 more were so badly injured they never played again. 15 others aboard also died. As the snowflakes fluttered across the airfield, the temptation was too much for 2 of the younger players in Manchester United's travelling party. Eddie Coleman, 21, was the first to scoop up a handful of snow from the ground. David Pegg, 22, soon joined him. The 2 were best friends, and suddenly snowballs were being launched through the air. Hours later, both would be dead. Along with 21 other passengers aboard British European Airways Flight 609. It was early afternoon on Thursday, February 6, 1958, and the twin-engined Airspeed AS-57 Ambassador, a model known as the Elizabethan, carrying manager Matt Busby and his United players, had just landed at Munich Riem Airport for refueling on its way back to England from the team's European Cup quarter-finals second leg against Red Star Belgrade in the old Yugoslavia, now Serbia. The Busby Babes, with an average age of 22, were in the semi-finals for the second successive season. Coleman, nicknamed Snake Hips because of the way he used to shimmy past opponents, fetched a round of hot drinks. Others went to buy presents for their loved ones. Frank Taylor, the only survivor among the 9 journalists aboard Flight 609, recalled in his book The Day a Team Died. They were a happy group. Anybody who was anybody in British football was quite convinced that Matt Busby had brought to Old Trafford the most talented group of footballers ever seen at one club. The Elizabethan was so highly rated within the aviation industry, it had been used to fly Queen Elizabeth II to her international appointments. Busby, whose managerial achievements by that stage already featured 3 league championships and an FA Cup, looked tired and grey. He and his staff were in the middle rows, and behind them there was football's original boy wonder, Duncan Edwards, a player still often cited as one of the greatest young talents England has ever produced. The propellers roared into action, the plane began picking up speed, and the slush started to fly off the wheels. But it quickly became apparent something was wrong. There was a technical fault. For the passengers, there was a bit of consternation and all the sorts of questions and theories that you would expect in those circumstances. Had the engine cut out? Was it snow on the wings? Any sign of the weather letting up? They were entitled to have a few concerns, given that it had been less than a year since another British European Airways aircraft, flying in from Amsterdam, had crashed near Manchester's own airport, with the loss of 22 lives. As everyone trooped back into the terminal, Alf Clark, the Manchester Evening Chronicle's correspondent, estimated it would be 2 to 3 hours before they were ready to take off. The call came for everyone to return to the aircraft. Again, the passengers took their seats, strapped themselves in, and readied for takeoff. Again, the nose wheel refused to lift. The brakes went on, and the plane judded to a halt on a layer of white-brown slush. This was the second failed attempt to get off the runway, and this time, one voice rose above the others. It belonged to Frank Swift, the former England goalkeeper, whose 16 years at Manchester City had involved winning the 1936-37 championship, and 2 years earlier, the FA Cup. Age 44, Swift was on the plane as part of a new career, writing about football for the news of the world. He was a big, amiable man, but there was unmistakable alarm in his voice. "What the hell is going on?" he was shouting. The prospect of getting back to Manchester appeared to be receding as the passengers squelched to the terminal for a 3rd time. Again, though, an announcement came for everybody to return to the plane. It had been very quick, which added to the sense of unease. Greg and Blanchflower had not even had time to spark up their cigarettes. Blanchflower stuck one behind his ear, and the pair of them exited the terminal to head into the snow again. The weather was as bad as I had ever seen it on my football travels, Charlton would later say. There were 6 or 7 inches of slush on the runway. Nobody, though, challenged the decision to make a 3rd attempt. Busby wanted the players to get back to Manchester so they could have a full day's rest before playing Wolves that Saturday. The pilot, James Thane, had been given the clearance to try again, and if any of the passengers thought it was crazy, nobody had the gumption to speak up. As Greg would later say, sometimes it takes a brave man to be a coward. Instead, the players were counted back on, one by one, and at 2:59 p.m., a radio message crackled up to the control tower. "Are we cleared?" On board, there was a mix of bravado and butterflies. In the cockpit, Thane glanced at the airspeed indicator. At 117 knots, he called out V1, or velocity 1, the point at which it was unsafe to abandon takeoff. In usual circumstances, the next step would have been to call V2, at 119 knots, the speed required for takeoff, but that was the moment the needle started dropping. The plane, coded 609 Zulu uniform, had become a death trap. Suddenly, it was 112, then 105. Thane was banging furiously on the throttle, trying to do something, anything, to get some more power from the two engines. When he next looked up, he could see they were running out of runway. In that split second, he and his co-pilot knew disaster was imminent. The plane kept going, speeding past a red outbuilding that it had stopped almost opposite on the previous two runs. Thane, a day short of his 37th birthday, knew he had to take emergency action. A sense among some of the passengers that they might be airborne. In fact, the plane never left the ground. Audible from the control tower, a succession of terrible bangs. All these years later, it is fair to say the death count would not have been so devastating if safety precautions, which are standard today, were applied in 1958. Hypothetical perhaps, but there may not have been any fatalities at all if the fencing had been further back from the runway, or if there had not been so many buildings in close proximity, including a wooden hut containing a truck loaded with drums of fuel. When the plane was torn apart, one section careered into that hut, creating a fireball. The Munich air disaster remains a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the profound impact of loss on the sporting world. The legacy of the Busby Babes endures, inspiring future generations with their talent, spirit, and the tragic story of their untimely demise. So tickle that like button and be sure to subscribe for more.